History at High Noon after a summer vacation and part of the fall. So I'm glad to see all of you back here again. And you always remember, I always ask you to thank the library for giving us a good home. They put together the tea and the coffee and the water, and so it's very good to have such a good special place to be. Two of the members of the History at High Noon Committee are here, Diana Hayes and Rosalie Johnson, and we're going to meet next Monday, and we're going to plot out 2017. And we've already got some good ideas, and we're always welcoming more and new ideas from you. And I hope that you, if you have a good thought or a good story to tell, that you'll talk to Diana or to me or to Rosalie. We've been doing it a long time. The yellow sheets up on the board are a record of the programs we've had since the year 2002. We were doing it before that, but I hadn't started listing them down. But it's quite an impressive list of people who have been up here at this podium, and so that's good. I do have one personal note today. There's two people missing here today that came all the time to History at High Noon. Faithful, faithful people to History at High Noon, and that's Jess and Donna Nelson. Jess passed away this summer, and Donna's moved to Lincoln, Nebraska to be living with a daughter that's there. So I just couldn't help but think about them today, that when I came, they were always here. Good friends. And so I want to tell you about November 18th. Guy Edwards is going to be here, and he's going to talk about homesteading. And he's talking about the memories of his father, homesteading in the Marcus area in Meade County. So if you have some memories of that area and want to share them too, we're always glad to have you be part of the program. And so it is my great honor and pleasure to introduce Dorothy Short and her son Danny, who's here to be with her, to be part of the program, to tell the story and the memories of the Escott family. And you can see she's put in a lot of work with posting pictures and gathering her information. So thank you, Dorothy.
Thank you. Well, thank you for coming. There's a couple of things I couldn't get on the board that are up here that you might want to take a look at, but the rest of it, what I could find, is on the board. And I regret that I don't have a lot more, because I had a box with pictures and stuff in it, took it to a family reunion last summer, then couldn't find it, and finally decided, yes, it's still at Susie Payne's, but she doesn't know where, and right now she's in the hospital in Billings, in a advanced care unit. She had necrotizing fasciitis, the flesh-eating disease, and she was here in Rapid and had 3 surgeries, and then they sent her to an advanced care out there. Now she's had skin grafting, and we're expecting her to come home on Monday back to Sturgis. So anyway, I'm going to just read. My great-grandparents on the side of my grandmother were Henry Escott and Prudence Hill Escott. Henry was born in England and came to America when he was 2 years old. He fought in the Civil War battles and was wounded several times. He married Prudence Hill, and I don't have any information hardly at all about her. It would all be in that box of stuff that I don't have. They had 8 children, and one of them was my grandfather. My grandfather, William Henry Escott, was born on May 1st, 1864 at Big Rapids, Michigan. His parents were Henry Escott, that I just talked about, in Prudence Hill. His childhood was spent in Michigan, and as a young boy, he lost the sight of one eye due to a bee sting, and I never knew till just when I was looking through some stuff in one of the old faith books that that's what happened to his eye. I always knew he was blind in one eye, but I didn't know why. As a youth, he worked as a lumberjack in Michigan. In 1883, he came to Dakota Territory, and on January 1st, 1887, he was united in marriage to Axa Jenny Spencer at Faulkton, South Dakota. They lived in the Faulkton area until 1909 when they moved to a homestead 14 miles north of Faith, of what is now Faith. It wasn't a town yet then, I guess. He ranched until 1922 when they moved into, moved to Faith where they lived until his wife passed away in 1931. He moved back to the ranch and lived there for a while, and then for a while he lived over here in Sturgis in a little shack next to my parents, and they lived down near Bear Butte Creek, north and west of where the post office now is. He died on August 4th, 1941 at Faith and was buried at Faith at the Faith Cemetery next to his wife. My grandmother, Axa Jane, and I've seen many spellings for Axa, and one of them is ACHSA, and I've seen it AX something, and anyway, I just took this one. My grandmother, Axa Jane Spencer, was born in Bennington, Black Hawk County, Iowa, on October 6, 1869. Her parents were Franklin Spencer, a Union Army veteran, and Eliza Marie Du Bois, a descendant of Louis and Catherine Du Bois of New Paltz, New York. And I don't quite know what the story is on that. And I've been told that the artist Richard Du Bois, who painted that beautiful picture that probably a lot of you have seen of Sheridan Lake, of the house, or not Sheridan Lake, yeah, Sheridan Lake. And the old lodge that was there, it burned down and then they built a new one. But I have been told that he was related to the Du Boises that I was related to, but I don't know for sure. She passed away in 1931 in a hospital in Rapid City and is buried at the Faith Cemetery. My grandmother took many photos and developed them herself. I'm not quite sure how she learned to do that way back then, because probably she was doing it when she was living in these soddies. So she had made a dark room of some kind, I guess. And anyway, a lot of those brown ones that are on there that are kind of brown are pictures that she took and developed. Okay, like Robin added this, leaving some family history in pictures, in which she did. To this union, 17 children were born. Going through it kind of sounds like a list of begats or lineage from the Bible, but bear with me. Prudence, Prue, was born in 1887 in Falk County. She married Dan Meckling. They had 2 children, Charles, Bud, and Claude. And Bud is Bob Meckling's father. Bob Meckling's father was my first cousin. Then she later married Ed Burdett, and they had 1 son, Irwin. Prue spent most of her life in the Faith area, and all of her children are deceased. The second child, Mary Elijah, was born in 1889, and she died in childhood. The third child was George Elbert, born in 1891 in Luther, Michigan. He married Agnes Althwaite in Bison, South Dakota, and I think she was from Waubee or someplace back there. They had 4 children, George Jr., Ronald, Earl, and Faye. They lived in Summit, South Dakota, and later in Sturgis. And he died in the Veterans Hospital in Hot Springs and is buried at the National Cemetery. And all 4 of his children are deceased. The 4th child was my father, William Albert Burt. He was born in 1892 in Millard, Falk County, South Dakota. In 1910, he moved with his parents to Faith Country. He homesteaded 14 miles north of Faith on the Morrow River, and he served with the Army in World War I. When he got out of the Army, he went to Wisconsin to visit a sister. And that sister had married a guy who came out from Wisconsin and filed a claim on North of Faith. And so when he got out of the Army, he went back to visit her. And while he was there, he met her neighbor, Christina Elizabeth Schradel, who was my mother, of Clayton, Wisconsin. They were married in Minneapolis, and they moved to Faith, where they lived until 1937, when they moved to Sturgis. And there were a lot of other moves in between there, and I do go through a few of those a little later on in this, but some of them I can't remember even, but, and then they moved to Sturgis, and they lived in Sturgis till 1941, when I graduated from high school. They moved back to Faith until 1948, and during that time, my dad was a rural mail carrier, and his mail route, they lived in Faith, but his mail route started 10 miles west of Faith at what used to be Edson, South Dakota. And his mail route went from there up into Perkins County to Bixby and Imogene, clear up in Perkins County. And that year, those 2 years, or 2 years during that time, I was teaching at a school west of Faith. It was called East Deep Creek. And I was staying at home, and I'd leave on Monday morning with him when he went on the mail route, and he'd drop me off. And I stayed in a little room that was the teacher. He'd hooked onto the school, and then he'd pick me up when he came back from his route on Friday. And one of my students at that school is here today, Jackie Dale, who's now related to me, but at that time, she was, I saw her for 2 years out there. And then let's see. My folks moved back to Sturgis in 1948, and they lived for most of the rest of their lives, except for 2 years, for 52 to, maybe 6 years. 52 to 58 is what I have here. I thought it was only a couple of years, but anyway, they lived and worked at Igloo, South Dakota, in the ammunition depot down there for those years. My father died in 1967 at the age of 75 at the Fort Meade VA Hospital, and he is buried at the Black Hills National Cemetery. My mother was born in Cripple Creek, Colorado, to Michael and Mary Weedman Schradel. Her father worked for the railroad, and that's how they happened to be there. As a child, they moved to Madrid, Nebraska, where her father was still working for the railroad, and then they moved to Clayton, Wisconsin, where they started a dairy farm, which they ran for many, many years. Both of my parents were members of Grace Lutheran Church. My mother was active in GLCW, World War I Auxiliary, World War I Widows, AARP, Chatter Club, Meade County Senior Citizens, Canasta Card Club, Monday Morning Coffee Clutch, and RSVP. I volunteered. I got that out of her obituary. She died in 1981 and is also buried at the Black Hills National Cemetery. Let's see. Next in line in the Escotts was Myrtle Johanna. She was born in 1894 and she died as a child. The sixth sibling, born in 1896, was Esther Coral. And she's the one that married this man, Emil Gabin, from Wisconsin, who's out here. And there is a really funny story in this book about Prue, the older one, and when she and her husband and Eddie and Emil got married. What a time they had. It's a funny story. They bought the license in one county and the minister didn't show up, so they tried to get married someplace else. It was in the wrong county, and this just went on. It's just a crazy story. Let's see. They moved back to Wisconsin, and they always lived there. Then they had 4 boys, Carl, Mick, Lester, and Alvin, all 4 of whom are deceased. The next child, John Franklin Lynn, was born in 1898. He married Vanita Walters from out by Faith. They lived in the Faith area for many years and then moved to Sturgis, where they spent the rest of their lives. They had 2 children, Dale and Helen Lee, and they are both also deceased. 8th in line was Arthur Joseph, Joe. He lived all his life on the family place north of Faith and was never married. Wilma Elnora Nora was born in 1900. She married Charlie Benson, and they had 4 children. Margie, Marie, Wanda, and Wilma, all of whom are deceased. Her second marriage was to someone named Chet Anderson. They had 4 children, Esther, Eunice, Clarence, and Chester, and all of those children are still living. This family lived mostly in the Hot Springs area and Custer. Esther Waltman, one of those children, still lives at Custer, and she's the next oldest surviving cousin to me. Number 10 was Henry Earl Hank, who was born in 1902. He married Mary Heron Spencer. They had 4 children, Mary Lou, Jenny Lee, Jerry, and Jean, and all 4 of them are deceased. And Mary had 4 children from a former marriage, Ella, Ellen, Arlene, and Melvin Spencer, and they also are all deceased. Hank and Mary always lived in the Faith area, first on a ranch and later in Faith, and several of their grandchildren still live on ranches out north of Faith. The 12th sibling, Laura Maud, was born in 1905. She married Ed Allen Harper. They had 2 boys, Alan, who was nicknamed Skis, and Tom. They also adopted her brother Den's daughter, Dency. They lived in the Faith area, the Pierre area, and later in Wyoming. And all 3 of those children are deceased. This one here. I wasn't ready to turn the page, no wonder. Wilfred Spencer was born in 1907 and he died as a child. There were 17 of them and 3 of them died as children. Wilfred Spencer, James, 14th was James Densall, Den, and he was born in 1908. And he married Ella Spencer, and their son Fritz died as a young child, and their daughter Dency was the one that was later adopted by my Aunt Maud and Ed. And Den and Ella were divorced, and later he married Alice Ritter from Dupree. They had 4 children, Carol and Cindy, and twins, Jeannie and Jim. All 4 of these children are alive, and Jeannie and Jim are the youngest of all the cousins that are surviving. And Den and his family spent most of their lives in the Faith area. Then next was Nellie Ann. She was born in 1909. She married Frank Burke, and they had 4 children, Joe, Delia, Dorothy, and Tom, and all 4 of those children are survivors. Nell and Frank lived in the Faith and Pierre areas, and later she lived in Colorado. Sibling 16, Al Elwood, was born in 1910. He married Carrie Twite in Wisconsin, and he lived there for many years, and they had no children, and he died here in a nursing home here in Sturgis. In fact, I think it was their nursing home. I don't know whether you were running it then or not for sure. Last but not least, number 17 in this large family was Marion Ruby Sis. She was born in 1913, just 10 years before I was born. She married Marion Engebretson, and to this union were born 5 children, Marlon, Max, Ethel, and Russell, Butch, and Susie, Cheryl. They lived in several locations in Perkin County and in Whitewood from 1945 to 49. After she and Marion divorced, she and Susie moved to Sturgis. The rest were all out on their own by then. And let's see, then she met and married Alva Groff. He from, I don't know where he was from, but he lived here then. And they moved to Arizona and spent all of their married life until they died in Douglas, Arizona. As I said before, Susie was her youngest child, and she's the one that planned on helping me with this today, and ended up with the flesh-eating disease, necrotizing itis, something like that. And she, like I said, she had 3 surgeries in Rapid, and a couple of weeks later was sent to advanced care in Billings. And she had skin grafts on October 11th, and is supposed to be coming home Monday now. She's coming back here to her own home. She doesn't have to go into a facility. All of my dad's siblings are deceased. Of the 54 cousins that I once had, only 17 are surviving. I was the 5th oldest of the cousins, and I'm the oldest now of the cousins that are surviving. The next oldest surviving cousin is Esther Waltman, that lives down in Piedmont, in Custer. The only one of the cousins besides myself who does live here is Susie. And my dad was the 3rd oldest of 17 children, and her mother was the youngest. So she is the age of, just about the same age as Danny, my oldest boy. Now I'll go back and talk a little bit more about my dad and mother and our family. After my dad and mother married in 1920 in Minneapolis, and my mother had been working there, was the reason they were married there, they moved back to South Dakota. I was born on December 13th, 1923. And I'd like to read an excerpt from my grandmother's original diary. And that's her original diary right there. And then one of my cousin's daughters did this book quite a while ago for a reunion, and there's this excerpt was taken from what she had in there. Anyway, this is what it said. December 19th, 1923, which would have been 6 days after I was born. Bert and Tina's baby girl was born. They named her Dorothy Barbara. She is a nice big baby. Mrs. Burke is here attending to her. And up here is the check for $20 that my dad gave to Mrs. Burke for being the person that took care of me when I was born. It's pretty tattered, but it's still there. I always knew that I lived in Keystone at some time when I was about 3 years old, while my father was working at Mount Rushmore. But I didn't really have much information, except I always knew that he worked on the wooden steps that they first built so that they could get up there. Anyway, I was in Rushmore recently, and I was able to get a little bit more information. It is recorded that he worked there in 1927 as a laborer for 40 cents an hour. His name is on the granite wall as you're walking up to the Visitor Center. And when I was down there, I took a couple of pictures. There's his name, and then it's just me painting at his name. And I forgot to mention these 2 pictures, but this is of a sod house that they first lived in north of Faith, and where my Uncle Al was born, and then they later had this sod house, and Sis was born in it, and I don't know much more about that. My brother Mike was born in 1925, and my sister Peggy was born in 1928, and both of my siblings are deceased. We lived in quite a few different places as we were growing up. Work was scarce, so we moved wherever there was work. I'm not sure where we were living when I was supposed to start school. I know we'd lived at one time in like a lumber, it wasn't a lumber camp because it was just my dad and my uncle, and they were cutting down trees that had been broken in a twister or something. I wasn't very big, so I don't really remember it. But anyway, I'm not sure where we were living when I was supposed to start school, but I didn't start school until I was 8. My first year was at Roundup, north of Faith, near Houston. I guess it was up to the teacher to deal with it when I start, as she saw fit. So she taught me the 1st and 2nd grade that year, and gave me material which I was supposed to learn and be ready, take the 3rd grade that summer and be ready for the 4th grade the next year. So the 2nd year I went to school, I was in the 4th grade, and that was down at a school called Rushy, south of Faith. By the next year, we were living in an abandoned sawmill camp near Custer, and my dad was in the CCs, in a CCC camp nearby. We went to a rural school west and, I guess, south of Custer, and I was in the 5th grade, I was supposed to be, and there were 2 6th graders. And at that time, the course of study which they were using had several classes of the 5th and 6th graders that were combined. You took the same science, a lot of things. So the teacher decided that it'd be better to have 3 sixth graders. And so I was in the 6th grade, the 3rd year was. By the 7th grade, we were back in Faith, and I went to school there that year. And by the 8th grade, we had moved out north of Sturgis to the Millick place. And I went to Eden School out there. And then we moved into Sturgis, and I went all 4 years to Sturgis High School, graduating in 1941 at 17. Even graduated early after all that. My brother chose not to go to high school, he joined the Navy. And my parents moved back to Faith, where my sister went to high school. I graduated in 41, and in January of 42, I went to Chance, South Dakota, which is, I don't know if any of you know where, some of you know where it is, to work for my aunt and uncle, who were Susie's parents. They had taken over the store and the post office at Chance. And Susie's dad was a rural mail carrier, so he wasn't allowed to be in the post office to do anything. He could carry the mail, but he couldn't go in the post office. So I was sworn in as a postal clerk, and he was done with his mail route then in July of that year. And so I just stuck around up in that country. And that next year, well, the fall of 42 would have been, let's see. I taught east of Chance, and that it was near where Hartmans lived, and it was the Hartmans that Noel Hartman was a brother. I had his sister in school, and I had no training whatsoever to be a teacher. But I only had 4 students, and 3 of them were from one family, and the other one was Dorothy Hartman. I went to 2 sessions of summer school that summer and obtained a certificate that allowed me to teach 1st through 9th grades. I taught 1 year south of Bison at Lone Tree, and several people are around that I taught there. I taught the Coppins, who the 2 Coppin boys who were both deceased, and I taught Liz Laughlin. They all lived around here. Then I taught 2 years in southern Perkins County, and that's when I was riding back and forth with my dad. Then I taught 1 year in Bell, 1 year in Whitewood, and 2 years in rural Meade County. That was later, after Danny and Dwayne were born, that I taught out there. And then later I did some subbing in the school system. In 1946, I married Robert Short, the oldest son of Ralph and Joy Short. He was in the Army when we met, but had switched to the Air Force by the time we got married and was stationed at Ellsworth. We had a double wedding with his sister Hazel and Charles Van Sickle. We were married in Broadus, Montana. Robin added this, because Montana didn't require a blood test or a waiting period. We had a weekend, so we didn't have a lot of time. We were married by a justice of the peace. We got the marriage license, and I said, somehow I must have known there were a couple of churches around there. Well, I found out both ministers were out of town. So we were married by the justice of the peace, who also ran the hotel. So we were married in a hotel room by the justice of peace. But it lasted. So. I guess that's all on that page. I love it. We lived in Rapid City for a short time, and then Robert was transferred to Denver. I took a job as a 1st grade teacher in Belle Fourche that year. But due to the polio epidemic, they postponed the starting of school for a couple of weeks. So I was able to take a bus down to Denver to see him. He got out of the service the next spring and went to work at Fort Meade, first as an aide and then as a fireman. And he didn't stay with that too long. He was working 24 on, 24 off as a fireman, so he got a truck and started hauling, and pretty soon he decided to just quit working out there, and he got a front end loader, and he was off and running. And then after the 2 boys were born, I taught for 2 years at a volunteer school out east. And I taught Deanne Bertolato in the 1st grade. She's Deanne Roth now. But she, and I thought she was going to be here. No, I don't think she's here. Anyway, Then in 1952, we moved to 1115 Fifth Street in Sturgis, where we lived for 60 years. And Robert passed away in December of 1999, and I moved to an apartment on Ellen Street in 2012. My brother, Mike, was in the Navy for many years, and he met his wife Rose in San Francisco while he was stationed there. They lived in California, Colorado, and Arizona, and then came back to Sturgis because he wanted to be close to the VA hospital. Both are deceased and buried at National Cemetery. They have one daughter, Wendy, and she went to high school in Sturgis because Mike was working on the missiles at that time, and they were living here. And Wendy married Tim Taylor, and they live in Albuquerque, and they have two children, Jenny and Chad. And Jenny lives in Denver, and Chad lives in Arizona. My sister, Priscilla Jean Peggy, married Dugan McGinnis, who is Robert's cousin. They lived in Faith, in North Dakota for a while, and then it ended up in Port Orchard, Oregon. Or Washington, Port Orchard, Washington, not Oregon. They had 5 children, Karen, Barbara, Bert, Sheila, and Sean, and they were divorced. And Karen was born in 1948, which was later, of course, that they were divorced. She lives in Texas, near a daughter, Gina. She has 3 other children. Barbara was born in 1950, lives in Washington State. And she has 3 children, Jackie, Valerie, and Sean. Bert was born in 1958. He's a trucker, so I'm not sure where he is right now. He has one son, Torin. I don't have it in here. Sheila was born in 1967 and has 3 children, Rebecca, Nathaniel, and Jeremy, and she lives in Wisconsin. And Sean was born in 1969. He has lived in Sturgis most of his life after moving here when he was a year old when his parents divorced. And he is not married. So he's the only one of my nieces and nephews on that side of the family that lives here. Now, I'm going to turn this over to Danny, and he's going to bring you up to date on himself and his siblings.
It's all yours.
Hi, I'm Danny. I'm the oldest of Robert and Dorothy's 6 children. I was born in Sturgis, December 6, 48.
Closer to the mic.
Move the camera.
Okay. I lived in Faith till I was 6 months old when we moved to Sturgis. I went through kindergarten, grade school, and high school in Sturgis. I went to Northern and Aberdeen, majoring in history. I came back to Sturgis, and I've lived here all my life, except for a couple of years I spent in Tucson, Arizona, where I met my wife, Becky. She has worked in several banks in Sturgis and recently retired from First Interstate. I worked for Short & Sons for many years. Most of my working life was spent in the family construction business. And we have 2 sons, Ben and Brad. Ben was born in '76. Went K through 12 in Sturgis and graduated School of Mines with a mechanical engineering degree, and later obtained his master's in business at Bradley University in Peoria. He became interested in caterpillars as a small child and worked with Short & Sons as he was growing up. He went to work for Caterpillar in Peoria and still works there. He married Alicia Rumler, a teacher in Illinois, who is now a full-time mom to their 2 children, Ian, who's 12, and Nora, who is 5. My second son, Brad, went to college in Arizona in Rapid City. He now works for Skyline Engineering in Rapid City as a computer-assisted designer. He was married to Alice Martin, who works in insurance. They have a 7-month-old son, Langston. My brother, Dwayne, was born January 19th, 1950. He also attended Sturgis schools, K through 12. Also went to college in Aberdeen and spent a couple of years in Tucson. He worked for the family business off and on while growing up. Worked at Craig Hospital in Denver for a couple of years and now works for Shore Construction, which is now owned by our brother Bill and sister Robin. Dwayne married Melanie Crane. They're divorced. They have 2 children, Graham and Bryn. They lived with their mother during the school year and both graduated from high school in Charles City, Iowa. They spent summers with their dad in Sturgis. Graham, born in 1980, joined the Air Force, and while stationed in Texas, met Jennifer Kirkland, who was attending nurse training in Abilene. They were married in Abilene, Texas. They lived in Abilene, Sturgis for a short time and now live in Hamilton. Jennifer continues to work as a nurse, and after several jobs, Graham now has car detailing businesses in a couple locations. They have 2 children, Adrian, who is 9, and Tucker, who is 6 months. Dwayne's daughter, Bryn, was born in '82 and lives in Denver. She went to college in Arizona. She started working in real estate and started nannying for her bosses and has worked for them for 10 years or so. About a year ago, she married Josh Kaiser. He has 2 sons, Jay and Joe, and they are expecting a baby next April. My only sister, Robin, was born March 29, 1953. She also attended Sturgis schools and college in Vermilion and Spearfish. Growing up, she also worked for the family business and continues to do all their bookkeeping. She also spent time in Tucson. She is the treasurer of the Motorcycle Museum and owner of Black Hills Rallying Gold, where she worked for Dean McNinney for many years. She's married to Pat Baldwin. After working for Short Construction for 15 years or so, Pat did 20 years of real estate for Century 21, from which he retired. They have 3 children, Esty, Tessa, and Tabor. Esty was born in '78, attended K through 12 in Sturgis, college in St. Paul, Minnesota, Colorado Springs, and Greeley, Colorado. She has a PhD in psychology and is a professor at the University of Montana Western at Dillon, Montana. She is married to Brendan Aiken from Colorado. He has worked for the National Forest Service and as a rock climbing instructor. They have 2 children. Kestrel is 5, Cedar is 2. The second daughter, Tessa, was born in 1980. Tessa attended school, K through 12 in Sturgis, college at the University of Arizona in Tucson, where she majored in marketing and consumer science. She married Al Gunderson from Piedmont. He went to chiropractic school in Chicago and now practices at Sturgis Chiropractic. Tessa works with her mother at Black Hills Rally and Gold. They have a daughter, Pate, who is 5, and a son, Rye, who is 2. Pat and Robin's son, Tabor, was born in '93. After graduation from school in Sturgis, he attended a semester of college in Hawaii and then came back and went to USD Vermilion. He majored in political science, was in ROTC, and joined the National Guard in 2014. At graduation, he was commissioned as a 2nd lieutenant and is now in Minneapolis. Bill is next in line. He was born December 14, 1954, also a Sturgis K through 12 graduate. He also spent a short time in Tucson. All of them except Robin, who went down to Tucson, worked at the same place, Harlow's Landscaping. Except for that short time in Tucson, Bill has always lived in Sturgis. He worked for Short & Sons, is now the owner of Short Construction. He married Janine Friedel from Newell. She has worked in banking for many years and is still working at First Interstate. Bill and Janine have 2 girls, Carlin and Erin. Carlin was born in '93, went K-12 in Sturgis, and graduated from Brookings with a nursing degree, and is now working at Spearfish Regional Hospital. Erin, born in '95, is going to college in Brookings. When she graduated from Sturgis, she ended a 59-year run of someone of our family being in the Meade School District. I started it and she ended it, I guess. Bob, the 4th son, was born on April 24th, 1958. After graduation from Sturgis High School, he joined the Navy, the only one of my siblings to be in the military. He married Tina Bird, and they had 2 sons, Adrian and Ryan. Adrian was born in 1984 and died in a car accident near Bear Butte Lake in '97 at the age of 13. He loved baseball, and there is a memorial to him at the Sturgis Baseball Complex. Ryan was born in 1986. Bob and Tina were divorced. Tina moved to Washington State, and Ryan went to school in Sturgis and Washington and now lives in Portland, Oregon. Bob is working in the oil fields in North Dakota as a pipeline inspector. In 1968, Roger was born. Soon after graduating from high school, he moved to Portland, Oregon, where he worked for a sign company in a shipyard. He married Delilah Antuna. They have 2 children, Seth and Sydney. They divorced, and Delilah and the kids still live in Portland. Seth, born in '97, graduated high school this year and plans to leave for the Navy soon. Sydney, born in 2000, is 16 and a junior in high school. Roger is living in Colorado. All of us were baptized and confirmed at Grace Lutheran Church in Sturgis, as were many of the grandchildren and great-grandchildren. That's what the short kids are up to, I guess.
Anybody have questions of our good speakers here?
What's the Tucson connection with your family? I know about Beatty, but how'd you all end up in Tucson?
After a really bad winter in Aberdeen, a couple of us and another guy from here in town, his grandfather, their grandparents were in Tucson, and warm weather looked pretty good, and so we started there. And why I just through 2 generations, everybody ends up going back there.
Well, I graduated from the University of Arizona, and I spent 4 wonderful winters down there. I
Yeah.
had 18 lousy winters in Watertown. So I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Any other questions for either one?
Do you know who lives on the family ranch north of Faith now?
Yeah, Kelly Escott. He's
I was just-
Jean's son,
Yep,
my cousin Jean's son.
yeah. Is that where the house is under the bluff?
Pardon?
Is where the house is by the bluff? There's a big hill?
One of them is. One of them, but 2 of the daughters live down there on the river too.
Okay, all right.
I tell you, it's just doggone more fun
Just
to
when
listen to
people
a
talk
family
about
history
coming
like that.
from good blood or good stock, I think that's an example of,
Yeah.
you know, my people are weenies. Yeah.
And the stories of Dorothy in grade school, skipping around, going back. I think it's just fun. And Dorothy and I are contemporaries in age, so I kind of can relate to that 41, 42 business. Yeah, very much so.
One of the excerpts from that diary that she didn't read, that her grandmother put in at the same time that she was born, was that,
Oh, I did, it was on there, I
Yeah.
forgot to read it.
she wrote that, all the lights came on in Faith the night before she wrote that. So when Mom was like 5 days old, it was the first time electricity went all the way through Faith.
She lit up the skies.
Danielle is.
And they still have electricity there?
Yeah.
It was a big deal.
Yeah.
Big deal.
They have their own system, don't they? They have their own power system in Faith. Don't they have their own power system in Faith?
There's a plant that goes all the time.
There used to be a power plant.
They, yeah, I don't know if they've joined another now, but they were.
I don't know where it comes from now.
And the other thing too that struck me is, as you do these family histories in Sturgis in the area, up will pop other family names, you know, when you said Mecklich, sure, McGinnis, it's like, sure as heck, everybody in Sturgis is related to somebody else. Unless you're a newcomer like me, so there you go.